My quote in the yearbook was, adversity introduces you to yourself. I just love that quote. Like, when the going gets tough, you got to know, what you got to find out what you're made of.
What's up, everyone? You're listening to the Do Hard Things podcast by Elite SRS. The purpose of this show is to share stories of hardship and victory as an encouragement for those in the middle of their own hard thing. Because we know hardship produces perseverance, which produces character, which ultimately produces hope. Today's guest is Rob Lee. Rob is a lifelong outdoor adventure enthusiast who created and completed what he calls the World Triathalon, successfully summiting Mt Everest, swimming the English Channel, and biking across the United States in 6 months. Rob shares stories and lessons learned from his adventure and reminds us that we shouldn't limit ourselves before we try. If you enjoy the show, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a review so more people can be encouraged by the stories we share. Now here's the conversation with Rob Lee. All right, got Rob Lee on the Do Hard Things podcast and super excited to have you. Thanks for making some time.
No, I appreciate you having me on, and excited to have a little chat.
Yeah, let's give the people some context. So when people ask you what you do, how do you answer that question?
I probably, like a lot of people, it's a little bit of a complicated answer, but I would say I sell real estate in Park City, Utah, and I would like to say I like dabble in athletic pursuits, but it's probably a little more than dabbling. And my real estate career allows me to do that. I work with my father in real estate, and so I'm always encouraging him to go on vacation because I'm always basically asking for vacation time. Yeah, should I go on this month-long expedition or whatever else? And so he takes care of business while I'm away and vice versa. And it works out pretty well. But I sell real estate here in Park City, residential real estate, and travel the world, doing a lot of athletic pursuits individually, but also mostly with my partner, Caroline.
Wow. So how long have you had that kind of nice, healthy balance of doing real estate and then traveling and doing these, as you're putting it, athletic pursuits?
Yeah. I think balance is a good word to use there. And as we all know, balance, you're always finding that balancing act. So, even this last year, I don't know if I'd say that the balance was out of whack, but we almost probably traveled a little too much. We probably could have had a little bit more success if we would have toned it back, maybe 1 or 2 trips. And of course, I love to travel and see the world and try to accomplish these things. But at the end of the day, sometimes you got to make sure you're focused on your goals. And it was hard to focus on one when we were maybe in another country or on some glacier or something like that. And so, long story short, to answer your question, I've been in real estate for 17 years, I think it is. Yeah, 17 and a half. And I've been an athlete my whole life. I think I've started doing these bigger athletic goals, mostly due to my partner, Caroline. Some of your listeners might know her, Caroline Gleich, and she's a professional ski mountaineer. So I wouldn't necessarily call myself a professional athlete because I don't necessarily have the sponsors or wherever to say that I'm a professional athlete, but that is it is my life more than anything else. That's what I strive to do, is to be outdoors and to accomplish things and to see new places and all these kind of things. I just don't necessarily make my money from that, and I don't have the sponsors to do it. So my athletic sponsorship is kind of my job, which is real estate.
Yeah. Your real estate job funds your real job.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
However you want to define it. So, okay, you've said athletic pursuits, and then you've sprinkled in words like glacier and ski mountaineer. And I think when people hear athletic pursuits, they're probably not thinking what you're defining that as. Yeah. So I'd love to hear how when you say athletic pursuits, What is that?
Honestly, the reason I say it that way is because I'll do anything and everything under the sun as long as I'm outside and
Yeah.
I'm getting some exercise and some vitamin D. My background is, in high school I was a swimmer, a cross country runner, a water polo player, but I grew up in Park City, Utah, which is
Man.
where I still live now, and so I also mountain biked, I don't know how many days, but most days in the summer, or let's say like, I don't know, 4 or 5 days every week or something in the summer. And kind of same goes in the winter for skiing. I didn't get into backcountry skiing and some of the bigger mountain stuff until a little bit later in life. But all these things were kind of like a goal. The one thing that I've never done is an eco challenge. I remember growing up watching the eco challenges, and it's the diversity of sports where you're kind of doing a little bit of everything under the sun.
Yeah.
The other one was watching the Ironman, and that was like, I'm going to be an Ironman. And those were kind of my sports, and I'm an endurance athlete. And so
Right.
I did my first Ironman when I was 19, when I was in college. And then it took a couple of years and whatnot, and we can get into that, but I ended up getting into half Ironman triathlon more than anything. That was kind of my bread and butter. And in, let's see, 2000, I should know this, 2012, I was the men's 30 to 34 world champion in half Ironman. So that was
Wow.
my mainstay at that time. Um, I'll just keep rambling on here, but once I met my partner, Caroline, obviously, as I mentioned before, she's a professional ski mountaineer. I transitioned a lot of those skills into big mountain skiing. And I'd already done some of the big mountains as far as climbing. I'd climbed Denali, highest mountain in North America,
Yeah.
Aconcagua, highest mountain in South America. But when we met, we started going to places like Peru and skiing, 18, 19, 20,000 foot peaks, and New Zealand, and a lot of different places all over the world. And
Yeah.
so I do a lot of things with her career, and I get to be kind of like the fly on the wall a little bit and do a lot of
Yeah.
the photos and videos. But I've still got to ski these mountains and climb them. So I've got that. And then I've kind of transitioned my triathlon thing after some injuries and whatnot into some other pursuits, which you may be aware of, which was, the big one was my ultimate world triathlon in 2019.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, it's kind of a little of everything. I mean, I was just thinking I wanted to head to somewhere like a Caribbean place and learn how to free dive and do some spear fishing or something like that. So it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. That's so fun. And I mean, you say it casually, but like a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is takes a lot of training and skill. And then even just water polo by itself is really hard. Like I remember doing that unit in PE in California and sitting out on the side when the ball would go to the other side of the pool because it was just too much. Like I sink in the water. I don't know if you do, but swimming's hard, man. And endurance swimming is the next level. So even
Well,
just you defining that is impressive.
yeah, the advantage I had in I guess water polo, but that's kind of I guess normal in water polo, but especially in triathlon, is my swimming background, right? So I'm swimming is probably my, like, I don't know, we'll call it like my best sport, especially if you compare it to like the
The rest
masses,
of
right?
them. Yeah.
So when you look at some of the athletic accomplishments that I've had in swimming, people just can't wrap their head around the swimming ones because they have a hard time, maybe getting across a 50-yard pool or a lake, a small lake or something like that. And when you talk about the English Channel and
Right.
swimming, it took me 11 hours and 49 minutes to get across the English Channel. And people go, how do you swim that long? And it's this sounds funny, and I hope it doesn't sound cocky, because it doesn't mean, I don't mean it to be that way, but
Yeah.
it's kind of like walking to me. I've been in the water so many hours of my life that of course, like, swimming really hard for that long would be like impossible, but I can kind of like swim a long time and be pretty comfortable most of that time.
Yeah. Which again, you make it sound easy, but I mean, is impressive. So it sounds like you've had quite the plethora of experiences. And I'm wondering, I mean, growing up in Park City, I'm sure had some influence on, your pursuit of these things. But were there other people, parents or siblings, or like, where did that kind of get birthed from if it wasn't just living in Park City? Was there anybody else that helped cultivate that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that I definitely have to go to probably my parents first, as far as my parents were athletic and got us into the outdoors. And my dad took me up to some of the Grand Teton when I was 15, and he was a big surfer in his day. And,
Mm,
back in the day, he was a baseball player and all these kind of things, and a kayaker and all these
yeah,
kind of things. But
always been
um,
athletic.
yeah, definitely athletic. So that's probably maybe the first part, but maybe even more so important was I was the second of two boys. I have an older brother who's 2.5 years older, and I've always kind of attributed a lot of my athletic achievements to him, in the sense that when I was, I don't know the ages, probably anywhere from really like when I was first born, but really like maybe 5 years old to say 15, probably in that span, especially. I think I was always trying to keep up with and stay with my brother and his friends. And
Yeah,
and I can kind of like vaguely remember them trying to ditch me on their bikes or something, right? Like, cause I'm like the little, annoying little
yeah.
brother or something
Your
like
brother
that. And
is still here.
yeah, and I'm sure they lost me more than once, but I think after a couple of those times, I was like, I have to keep up with them, and they're the older boys, and I want to, like, go hang with them. And so I always, I think I just pushed myself, and I was like, I'm not tired. I'm going to keep up with them, and I did that, and that kind of translated into, I guess, like adolescent athletics and like high school athletics, where there was this competitiveness to keep up or be the best. And so I always I had high ambitions when it came to all my sports. And there was a time when I was probably, if I had to guess, I was probably 10 years old or so, and my parents told me, like, you got to quit one sport here, because I had like 10 sports, where I did the swimming, and I was on baseball and soccer and little league football and all these things, and
Yeah.
then I skied and mountain biked and all this stuff too. And so I think the first one to go was soccer slash football. We have to say that because the World Cup just happened.
Well, yeah.
But anyway, I think definitely chasing my brother down was a huge influence in my athletic endeavors.
Yeah. And does he take credit for that as well? Or is he kind of like, hey, thanks but no, it's all you, man.
I don't know. I've never really asked him that question. I'm guessing he would appreciate me saying it a little bit,
Yeah.
but he's certainly athletic and still does a lot of athletic things, but he hasn't kind of made it kind of his life like I have.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he wouldn't like take credit for it, but I'm sure he appreciates it a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Is he in Park City too? Like, are you?
He recently moved from Utah to Austin, Texas. He works for Tesla, so he's down there. And I just went and visited him for the first time and watched the final game of the World Series, which was pretty fun. But he's
Yeah.
in Austin, Texas now.
Okay, cool. So I'm curious. It sounds, with all the plethora of experiences, like when you think back on them, what would be one that surprised you? Like you had an expectation going into it that it was going to be, X thing, or you're going to have this kind of reaction, and it just didn't go the way you thought, or was even better. Like that's one that comes to mind.
I'm gonna have to name two here.
Okay.
I'll just do it kind of quickly, but the first one was showing up to my first year of swimming at UC Davis. I was a walk on there, and I'll tell you, the first week that I was there slash 2 weeks, I probably didn't train enough as far as swimming leading up into that. And we had a good swim program here in Park City, but to go from our swim program and then obviously summer where I didn't really have a coach, and then show up to a college swim program, and I just got hammered into the ground. I mean, I was there and I was just totally overwhelmed by it, and was unsure if I was doing the right thing. And I luckily made it through the final cuts to make the team that year. But it was a really hard, I think it was like 2 weeks was kind of the initial tryout.
Yeah.
And that was a really hard couple of weeks for me.
Wow.
Um, so there's that. And then I think the other one, which we can talk more about, was the Ultimate World Tri, and it just how it panned out, how it started, how it panned out, and how it felt while I was doing it. And it was, parts of it were just way harder than I ever expected. And I just kept thinking, like, what did I get myself into here? But at the end of the day, those are the times where you can reflect back, and they're the best memories, because the work you put in and how hard it was, and the fact that, I just kept pushing is you just can't take that back.
Yeah, no kidding. So, yeah, well, let's just go ahead and get into it. Well, I want to ask the question, like, I'll frame it for people that, like, the central question of this podcast is, what's the hardest thing in your life you wouldn't take back? And the purpose of that question is to be an encouragement to other people in the midst of hard seasons, because we believe that people's stories are a great way to offer perspective and hope. Perspective that you're not the only person who's ever gone through whatever the thing is, and then hope that, like, something good's going to come from it. It will end. And people can say, hey, this is true because of mine. And so anyways, that's the purpose of the question, is to elicit those stories to encourage. So is it the hardest thing in your life you wouldn't take back? And if it's not, let's go into it now. If it is, then let's just tie it all together into that question.
So I did this on the last question, so I hate to do it again, but the first thing I'm gonna ask you a question, actually, and that is,
go for it.
When you phrase that question, is it something that you chose to do, or that kind of chose you, or you didn't choose? Because there are certain things in my life, or I can give you the answer on both. But there's the World Triathlon, which is probably the hardest athletic thing I've done in my life. But then I chose that. And then there's the other thing that I did not choose.
Yeah.
So is the question meant to be one or the other?
No. So I think the reality is the growth, like, we're somewhat in control in the situations that we choose, but even in those, we lack some control over like how it actually plays out. But then life happens to everybody. And I think the hardest thing could fall within either of those, but the purpose is that, like, you grew from the hard thing, that some kind of benefit came out of it. And that could be arrived at whether you chose it or it happened to you. So I try not to limit the question to one or the other.
Well, I'll put it this way, actually. One probably in many roundabout ways, because this is the way life works, led to the other. Okay. So the one that kind of chose me, I certainly didn't choose it, was when I was pretty young. When I was 22, I got engaged. And when I was 23, I got married. And when I was, 23 and 3/4, I got divorced.
Wow, fast.
And so it's pretty quick. That only lasted about 9 months. And so that one definitely did not choose me. But you know how these things in life, at that time, it was the toughest thing I'd ever been through. And still to this day, I just, to a certain extent, because it was so long ago, I hate to admit how old I am, but it's almost seems like another life. But that one thing has led to a lot of other things that have been very positive. And so in all the kind of despair of being divorced and 23 years old and thinking, like, how did I get myself to this point? I think it's led me to other things. And in the end, one of those things was my partner, Caroline. And one of the things that she taught me was about kind of dreaming really big, particularly in this athletic pursuits category, but not just that, but in the context of this, we'll use the athletic endeavors. And so the next one was my Ultimate World Tri, and I'll give you a little background on how this whole thing came about. And it was, let's see, I'm trying to think of what year that was. So it would have been 2016 or 17, somewhere right in there. I have really bad ankles. I've broken the end of my fibula off twice. My ligaments weren't attached on either side on my right ankle. And so I roll my ankles all the time. And so, but I was still doing tons of, whether it's mountain running, marathons. I was doing my triathlon career for the while there as kind of a semi-professional pro. I started having a lot of pain in my ankle. So I went in and I knew what they were going to say. And he said, you got to have surgery. You have no ligaments. And so everything's moving around too much. I had a bone spur. You got to cut that off, reattach the ligaments and yada, yada. So I'm sitting there on the doctor's table. And literally while I was sitting there, I thought, gosh, I need something to get through rehab, some kind of goal in the future. And so this is way before surgery. I think I had surgery a couple months later or something, but I just knew I needed something because I've had a ton of injuries. I think I've broken about, I don't know, something like 20 bones, and I've had probably 20 stitches and a couple of surgeries along the way and whatever. So I know what injury looks like, and I know what rehab looks like. And you have
Do
to
all
have
the
a goal.
doctors in Park City know you well?
Pretty well. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've got a really good support system here between the PTs and then my Dr. Maximo Testa, who I'm just going to give a shout out because he was the chief medical director for BMC Bikes, and he's just the greatest guy and so knowledgeable. And you go into him and he knows exactly what's going on. And then I've got great referrals to the surgeons locally here, which there's some really good ones because I live in a ski resort town. So particularly knee surgeons, but there's some really good ankle surgeons. And so yeah, I knew I needed a goal, and I thought, okay, I'm a swimmer at heart. Like, this is the thing that I do probably more than anything, which is weird being from a ski town, but probably more than anything, that's like the mainstay. And I thought, I got to swim the English Channel, but I knew nothing about the English Channel, about like the rules or the water temperature or any, like the distance, anything. And so, but I made that like kind of almost commitment to myself there at on the doctor's table.
You made a commitment to yourself, knowing nothing about what you were committing to, and you saw it through, right? So can we just talk about the fact that that's a lot of people do that? We're heading into New Year's right now, and people do that all the time. And like, how were you able to like see it through? What about you and the character that you have, or the support system, or what variables allowed you to see something through that you committed to with very little understanding of what you were committing to?
It's a good question. I guess I would answer that by saying, honestly, I think a lot of my athletic endeavors have like, I mean, when I say that, I keep saying that word and it even sounds funny to me, but just being a swimmer in high school and knowing that like practice is going to be hard and you got to get to the end of it. And at the end of the year, it's going to pay off. And like I said earlier, I knew that I'd been through these injuries before. I needed a goal to get healthy for and to train for and all those kind of things. You know, I live in a place where as cool as you feel like you may be, or your athletic pursuits might be, or your accomplishments might be, you're on the bike trail and then you run into Ted Ligety, you know, multiple gold medal winner, and or I'm trying to think of, like, there's so many Olympic gold medals,
highly accomplished people.
And so you know, just having like one thing under your belt here, I mean, sure, it's cool, but it doesn't really like give you the credit. Like, there's just always something higher to reach for. But at the end of the day, I think you know, my one of my quotes, my quote in the yearbook was, adversity introduces you to yourself. I think the author is unknown. I don't know who actually said that.
Rob Lee.
I really loved the quote. And I think when I first introduced it to my partner, I think she did not like it because if you say it at the wrong time, it can come across like condescending or not empathetic. But totally. She's embraced it too, I think. And I think I just love that quote. Like, when the going gets tough, you got to know, you know, what you got to find out what you're made of. And I knew that the next couple of months were going to be tough with the surgery. And I knew having a goal at the end of it was going to be the way out. And what's funny is, you know, the divorce led me to, you know, Caroline. And then I had these injuries and they led me to rehab, and then like getting to the ultimate world try. So like ultimately my injury led me to the ultimate world try, which I consider my biggest athletic achievement. So it's always these dark moments that lead you to, you know, really great things, in my opinion.
If you enjoy the podcast, please do us a favor and head to your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. It helps a ton. And there's a reason all the podcasts you listen to ask you to do this. We want to continue to encourage people in the middle of their difficult seasons, and your ratings help boost our podcast visibility and the stories of our guests. Did you pause it and leave a review? If so, thank you. All right. Back to our conversation. So let's go back to you finished on the doctor's table, you were having surgery, and all that you had committed to at this point was, I'm going to swim the English Channel.
Yeah.
But it definitely grew into more than that. So let's pick up back where we were, and I interrupted you.
No, you're all good. I appreciate you doing that. I was just rambling on. So when I got home, I started like Googling English Channel and trying to figure out what this thing was about. And I can get into all the rules and all that kind of stuff, which I had no idea about. But the other thing that I found was this like controversy or debate, I should say, online about what's harder, swimming the English Channel or climbing Everest. Obviously, Everest is a very difficult thing to do, but you do have not everyone, but most people have the help of supplemental oxygen. You have the help of literally just the clothes on your, however many layers you want, or potentially heated socks or whatever you want. And Sherpa help, definitely want to give the shout out to the Sherpas.
Yeah.
Like, they're the strongest people on the mountain. And then the English Channel is like this, somewhere between 7 and 24 hours ish event, but you are pretty stripped down. You are not allowed to wear a wetsuit. The water is very cold, and it's you and the sea, and there's a boat next to you, so you can get some food and water. But if you touch that boat, you're disqualified. And so it's really you and the sea. And so there's this debate going on, and I thought, well, I wonder if anyone's ever done both to really compare. And I looked it up, and I think the time 9 people had done it, but had done both of those accomplishments, but no one had done it within like a calendar year. And I thought, well, if you do it 5 years apart, you can surely like compare them, but maybe not in the same way as if you put them right together. So my goal kind of became to climb Everest and swim the English Channel in a calendar year. The thing is about it is, with the timeline, it actually makes much more sense to do in a shorter timeline than that, especially when I started thinking about my, kind of my athletic abilities and where I came from in my triathlon background. I thought, I got to put a bike in there. Let me back up slightly and say, I'd always wanted to climb Everest. I'd already climbed Denali and Aconcagua, and I'd climbed a lot of other mountains. And so Everest was kind of on the list. And so I'd wanted to climb that. And so when I started thinking about, I need a bike in there to make this a triathlon. And when I say make it a triathlon, because I was told I couldn't run, climbing Everest was my run in this sense, right? Because I wasn't supposed to be running. So when I thought about the bike, I'd always wanted to bike across the United States, just always wanted to do it. And so that was kind of easy. And I'd always joked with a friend whose folks have a place in Nantucket. He'd invited me out a couple of times, and I thought, I'm sure it's really nice out there, but honestly, it sounds kind of boring. Like, I don't really want to just go like sit on this island and not have much to do. I found out later that there's more to do on Nantucket, but
for all the people in Nantucket. Yeah,
exactly. But I had always joked like, well, maybe if I like rode my bike from Park City out there, then I'd be so tired that I just want to like chillax and do nothing. So it was an easy ending point and an easy goal. I decided I was going to ride my bike from the West Coast to Nantucket. And so I combined all these three, but when I did the timeline of the whole thing, instead of a year, it ended up being within a 6-month period. And so that was the ultimate world triathlon, is first climbing Everest, because that almost always happens in the spring in May, swimming the English Channel, which almost happens always in the summer, which in my case was July, and then riding my bike across country I did in the fall. And so that ended up being within a 6-month period.
Wow. So I thought it had been within a year period, but it was 6 months.
Yeah.
And so essentially, like for all intents and purposes, back to back to back on those endeavors.
Well, I'll throw in the it ended up being more than the triathlon, because the swim happened in July, and then in August I got married, That was the hardest of the 4 events, and then went on the bike ride. So
Yeah.
yes, especially with the wedding in between, it really was back to back to back. The swim and the sorry, summiting Everest and the swim happened. Gosh, it's been a little while now. 43 days apart, if my memory serves me correctly. So pretty back to back. Absolutely.
Wow. Okay, I have a lot of questions. First question is, has anybody tried to replicate it since you did it?
Not that I'm aware of. I had I think 2 people reach out with questions, and they wanted to do something, either replicate it or do something similar, or do 2 of the events, or even just the ride or something like that. But we had a little thing, COVID, that I think got in the way of a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm, I never set out for this to be something to be replicated, but I'd love for someone to like do it, or do it in a different way, or have like 3 different mountains or channels or something. I think it'd be kind of cool, but not to my knowledge, no one has replicated yet.
Okay, so this globe trotting Ironman, so to speak, triathlon is yours and yours alone as we speak.
At the
To your
moment. Yep.
knowledge. To
Yep.
your knowledge.
Yep.
Wow, it's insane. Before I did the interview, I was telling people, "Hey, oh yeah, I'm doing an interview. This is what this is Rob's thing," and they're like, "Are you serious? That guy's crazy." And I'm curious, when you've told people like this is the thing that you did, or like post and pre. So you're planning it, telling people this is what I'm going to go do, coming out of surgery, getting ready to get married, and then post, like what are people's like one phrase, one word reactions to what you did?
I mean, I think generally speaking, kind of what you said, like insane or crazy or something like that. And actually, I'm glad you brought the part up about before, because I certainly had some encouragement, no doubt about that. But I think it was kind of a far-fetching idea. And what I'd like to say is that voices get in people's heads, right? So I had just a few people. One in particular, I'm not going to name any names, surely, but someone who was a professional athlete who thought like, who said something along the lines of like, well, if you want to do this swim, you really think like climbing Everest right before is like a good idea? Like, wouldn't you rather like make sure you accomplish one thing? Like, you're not going to be in the right shape. And, it was kind of more of a rigid, like training plan kind of person. And I kind of sat there in the locker room after a day of swimming and thought like, oh my God, like what have I gotten myself into here? And those voices get in your head. And I know people don't have malintentions when they say something like that, but I will say that got in my head, and other, negative voices did at times. And during my world try, like some of those negative things creep in when things are looking a little like shady or down or whatnot.
Yeah.
And, I don't want people to be all, peaches and rosy sunshine, but at the same time, like when someone's trying to do something like this, that's not always the best voice.
Right. No, that's good. And I wanted to ask some more questions about that period of time. So, particularly interested in the marriage piece, because you said it was hard. And I think people hear that and they go, oh, getting married is hard because you got to plan it, and like some of those pieces that come with just like hosting of a lot of people for a party. But like with the, what you've shared, having been divorced and having to recommit and get married again, I would imagine, I'm curious if that's part of what was hard, or if it really was the planning part and just the coordination and organization, or if there's a psychological element to it as well.
I think it's all of it. It's the time that goes into a wedding. It's the fact that I want to be there for my soon to be bride, and not, put everything on her shoulders. And I'm trying to focus and train and everything else. I mean, honestly, the other part of it, which it sounds maybe a little bit funny, but when so after Everest, I kind of planned for this a little bit and put on some extra weight for Everest, but I knew that I was going to lose a ton of weight when you're on Everest. Whenever you go to these big mountains, you end up losing. I think I lost 20 pounds on Everest.
Wow.
And that's pretty normal for me on these big mountains. But I also knew that I would get hypothermia if I was super skinny to do the swim, because the water's 60 degrees and I'm in there for 12 hours. And so I'd put some extra weight on, but in between the climb and the swim, I put on 30 pounds in 30 days. And this was
Gosh.
purely to not get hypothermia. And it almost sounds like a fun challenge for someone, because I ate and drank everything I possibly could under the sun. And it was fun for like a couple of days. And then it just got like sickening to like,
Yeah.
eat pizza in bed. All the dieting rules you've ever heard of, I was breaking.
Yeah.
Like just whenever I wasn't full, I was eating. And so I put on 30 pounds so I wouldn't get too cold, because I needed that extra layer of basically blubber to get me through the swim. So the other kind of funny thing about the wedding is I was the biggest, heaviest, fattest, whatever you want to call it, that I've ever been in my life for my wedding, which is not always what you want to do. And that's usually more attributed to maybe women, and it shouldn't be, but like there's all these things that I think should be talked about, and the male body image is a thing as well. And so it was everything. It was the time that went into it. It was how I looked, how I felt, what was coming up. It was giving my partner the time that she needed, everything. And part of it's a little bit of a joke, right? Like the marriage is the hardest part, but it's more the long-term part that the marriage needs the long-term
Right.
part. So anyway, I guess that's my answer.
Yeah. So let's talk about, before I ask more specifically what made the triathlon as a whole the hardest thing you've ever done, because you've done so many things. Let's go back to the first story and talk for a second about that. Because I mean, divorce is a thing that a lot of people deal with. And I think, a lot of times it's not something that they chose. That's certainly true for some people, but a lot of times it's not. So can you just talk about the like internal, because it was a quick period of time for you, like as far as marriages tend to go.
Sure.
But like the internal battle and struggle that existed, as much as you can. I mean, it's a long time ago, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But like, what was the mental battle and tension? Because a lot of that, like, I'm sure existed, but wasn't like visible to the world,
Yeah. Let's see. It's more like, where do I start? And that is, I guess we'll start with like just when it all went south. And I found out that my wife basically at the time, she basically said she didn't want to be married. I think there was a little bit of infidelity that happened in there. But it was more, she was like, I never wanted to get married. And that wasn't the case when we got engaged, but I think over the whatever it was, like a year or something between the engagement and the marriage, it was like too early in her life, and in retrospect it probably was in my life too, to get married. And then all of a sudden start moving towards this goal of life together, whether that's the house or the kids or the dog or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just, you're moving towards this thing. And I think she felt all of a sudden trapped by marriage. And looking back at it now, I can understand that, being 23, 24. But at the time, this wasn't my choice. She was leaving, and it was obviously just devastating to me.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are still together to this day. I think they're, let's see, I should know this, but they're probably 45 years of marriage or something like that, right in there. And so I never expected to be a 23-year-old divorcee, and especially just the whole thing just didn't make sense to me. And so it was just a rough period, and I didn't know how to kind of handle it, I would say, in a lot of ways. I guess the one thing that was positive out of that, and that any like most negative things that have come out of my life, what I go back to is like getting in nature and moving my body. And that could be the swimming, the biking, the skiing, the whatever. When I have more time to myself, and let's honestly just like bored at home, I just go for a bike ride, I go for a ski, I go for a swim, I do whatever, and it feels better. And then that has always like regenerated in these cycles of my life the different, whether it's been my triathlon career or this world triathlon or other things. So I think at the end of the day, it was a really tough time, but it just led me to get back out and get back to my roots.
Yeah. So what, like when you look back on that time and you think about like what it did to you, you mentioned like, oh, it led to a lot of good things, like currently your marriage partnership with Caroline, some of the opportunities that you had, not being in marriage and having time and resources most likely. But like, what have you learned in your character, that you have applied to, because I know I have friends who similar situations, really young, like in college, got married and then divorced and didn't see it coming. And like their character shifted, right? And they were like, man, I saw in myself like what I could have done differently or better. I mean, everybody does this. We go through hardships and we reflect. And so what did you reflect on and go, oh, like here's where I could grow and have been able to apply, in real estate or anything else that you've been doing?
I think I'd answer that by just saying I think it encouraged me to stay truer to my true values. That is, being honest with my partner, and sticking true to myself. Not, of course there's compromise in relationships, but I feel like I wanted to make sure that if I was committed in a relationship, I was, and that was probably to the detriment of a few in between relationships, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I felt like it made me want to be more honest and loyal and all these things. And when I was, probably to my detriment, or not to my detriment, to my current partner Caroline's detriment, it probably took me a little longer to fully commit.
Yeah.
We dated for, I think it was 5 to 6 years before we got engaged, and I was on the cusp, but she actually proposed to me on the top
Did
of
she
the
really?
sixth. Yeah. Yeah. She
More power
proposed to
to
me
her.
on the summit of Cho Oyu, which is the sixth highest mountain in the world, which was super cool. And so I think she had been hoping for a little quicker commitment there. So that was probably especially the one major detriment to maybe getting that marriage early, and then maybe not committing as fast as I would have otherwise. But other than that, I think it kind of strengthened my convictions of my other things that I really try to hold sacred. And those are things like the honesty and the trust and the communication and those kind of things.
Yeah. Man, well, it's more power to Caroline for, getting after it. And she knew what she wanted, man. She must really, really love you.
Yep.
If she waited that long and then she was like, I'm locking this up. So
Yep. She even asked my mom for permission.
did she really?
Oh yeah.
Oh, what an amazing
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Did you see it coming?
Yeah, I mean, we'd been talking more about it and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I would, it was definitely surprising. And also, especially on the top of the sixth highest mountain in the world, like, I will say that like any thoughts I had of it maybe happening, I totally forgot about it, because you're climbing this mountain
Right.
and you're in the death zone. You're very high. You're on an 8,000 meter peak. So like, I totally forgotten anything other than like getting to the summit and being safe and
Yeah.
keeping my partner safe and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden she dropped to one knee. And so it was really cool.
That
So
is really
we got
cool.
engaged, and our engagement photo has Everest in the background, which is pretty cool, which we
Wow.
climbed let's see, the next year. So that's pretty cool.
So let's transition then into the triathlon stuff a little bit. So did she climb, and was she your support team for everything that you did?
Kind of. And the reason I say that is because with anything related to the snow or climbing mountains, it's not a sport team, it's 100% partnership, and we support each other. So she wasn't really supporting me in that. I don't know that she would have gone to Choyu or Everest without my project. But that being said, like when we got to Choyu, just full disclosure, like we got to the summit, we started skiing off, and I skied like the first maybe third of the ski bowl train on the way down. And then I was like, there was a section that I was not comfortable with. I took my skis off and she kept skiing. And then I put my skis on later and skied some more. But in general, like she's the skier mountaineer more than I am. But on the swim, 100% support. And she was great. You're on the boat. And I'll tell you, if you're on the boat for one of these long distance channel crossings, it's probably worse than being in the water because you're going across a channel at the speed of a swimmer. So, 2 miles an hour, maybe 3 miles an hour. And you're in these heavy seas and you're just rocking for 12 hours. I mean, longer than that, honestly. She was probably on the boat for a total of 16 plus hours. So huge shout out to her and my other support crew who have been on the different channels I've been on. And then the bike ride, my intent was to do the bike ride self-supported, meaning I had all my stuff on my bike. Right. I was basically on my own. She came up to the start of the ride with me in Washington, and was with me for the first week, even though I was carrying all my own stuff. And I realized really quickly that the bike was much harder than I thought, and I needed more help. And so she stuck with me for the first, I don't know exactly 2.5 weeks or so. And then she had her own things to attend to. She left. My mom came and did this middle part of the country with me in the car. And then then Caroline came back and did the East Coast with me. So yes, she was there for most of the World Tri.
Yeah. All right. So when you went through Washington, did you start on like the Olympic Peninsula?
I started in Anacortes, and I basically did a northern route over the North Cascades there. And the first day was maybe okay, like 70 miles. And then I think it was the second day, it was like 115 miles and like 10,000 feet of climbing. And I had this fully loaded bike. Right. And the problem was, I mean, there was lots of problems. It would have been hard no matter what, but with the swim, with Everest, and then with getting married, I had literally been on my bike, like I would say less than 10 times all summer. And I just figured it's like riding a bike. I can get on, I can just keep riding for 100 miles. But when you throw in like a heavy bike and then these massive passes, I knew I had basically all day to do it, but I realized really quickly that if this was going to be really hard. And so after a couple of days of this, like just getting hammered, it was so hot. I think that second day I drank like, it was like 11 bottles on the bike of water, Gatorade, whatever, or, any kind of any liquids. And I didn't pee once. And I realized like I'm just going to get crushed by this ride. And so I realized after 5 or 7 days that I needed more help, and I asked for it. And part of it was, I might have been able to get through the whole country and do it, but it would have taken longer. I was actually hoping to do it in about 30 days. It took me 30, it was 37, 38. I'm forgetting right now. But it would have taken me even longer, but also I would have been kind of miserable. And this was kind of the homecoming after, Everest and the English Channel. Like I wanted to enjoy this a little bit and not just have it be a complete suffer fest. It was still, people always ask what was harder, Everest or the English Channel, because that was my initial question.
Yeah.
And I can answer that question ish, not really at all. But I would say of the three, the bike was the hardest.
Really?
Every day I had to get up before the sun came up, get some food in me, start before the sun came up because it was getting so hot, even in the fall. And I had to get all these miles in, and everything from not being trained for it to saddle sores to being too heavy for bike riding shape and all these things, that the bike ride was so hard. It was just like, it was torture at times and the most beautiful thing at times.
Oh man. So what was your favorite stretch of the bike ride? Cause I mean, we're in Washington State, just on the other side of North Cascades. And I'm very familiar with those mountains, and that is an intense way to start a bike ride.
Yeah.
But like, what was, one of your favorite stretches of the bike ride, favorite couple days that you can remember?
I'd love to tell you Washington, but that was probably one of the worst. Only because I was like just miserable, crushed, because it was the start. They always say I think the first day or two is usually okay. And then there's like of these like, month-long bike rides, it's that like day 3 to 10 that is like the worst. And Washington is a bigger state than you'd think. And it took me I mean, I think it took me 5 or 6 days. It wasn't like forever, but it felt like forever to get across my first
Still
state.
in the first state. Yeah.
It took forever. And I was like, oh my God, this is never going to happen in a month or even longer. I was
Yeah.
I was crushed. So to answer your question, I would say the number one memory that I probably have, the two top memories would be going over the going to the Sun Road in Glacier National Park.
Yeah.
And when I was coming down the backside, it was like 40 or 39 degrees and fully like deluge raining, and I was freezing, and I was wearing like plastic bags to try to stay warm, and it was still awesome. It was just a memory I'll never forget. The other one was in North Dakota. Like I woke up before the sunrise and I was riding and on this dirt road in the middle of nowhere, no cars anywhere. And it was like super foggy and the sun was coming up, and this like tree, this massive oak tree appeared out of nowhere. And it was like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. So those are my top two memories, but my top two states for riding would probably be Minnesota and Wisconsin, because of the bike trails that I could take there. So I could get off the major roads.
Yeah.
They were really spectacular.
Oh, that's cool. So you went down and around Lake Michigan?
Yeah. So I basically, once I got to Fargo, I dropped down to the Twin Cities and to Rochester, because that's where my partner Caroline grew up. And so I stayed with her brother
cool.
there, which was super cool. And then I went east from there to Milwaukee, and then down to Chicago, and then across to Cleveland, and then to New York. And my main thing was like, I wanted to ride, I'm going to say it wrong now, it's 6th Ave, right? Is the one directional through like downtown. Like after being on all these farms in North Dakota, I wanted to ride like downtown New York on this bike and like have the dichotomy of the two things. And it was super cool. That was really cool too. So I rode through New York, and then I went up the coast through Connecticut and to Hyannisport, and took the ferry across to Nantucket, and then went to the far east side of Nantucket and finished my ride there at the ocean.
Wow. What an adventure.
It was the like I said, the bike was probably the hardest of the three. It was also, crazy enough, I would say it was probably, it felt the most accomplished because it was the hardest, even though most people would, and include myself, would expect Everest or the English Channel to be like the crowning accomplishment.
I would have been in those camps. Yeah,
Yep.
Absolutely. So what is something that you feel like you learned or grew in through that whole world triathlon or the bike ride, but that hard experience? Like, what's something that came from that you look back on and are thankful for?
Yeah, maybe this is a little bit obvious, but I think it is that if you set these hard goals, and at times I thought during this thing, like, what am I doing? Like, why did I try to like smash this all together? Like all these kind of things. And at times, of course, on Everest, on the English Channel, on the bike ride, there was times I was absolutely miserable. And didn't know if I could keep going or if I'd make it on that particular leg or whatever. But I think what it teaches you is if you set hard goals, you can accomplish them. You gotta set the goal and then just go after it and have the conviction to keep going. And I think that could be applied to any point in life, right? Whether it's your job or any athletic goal or your relationship or whatever. Like if you work at it and if you have that conviction to keep going, you can make it.
Yeah. It's just that you got to get back on the bike, right?
Yep.
So do you think it was a harder physical challenge or mental challenge?
Gosh, I should have a good answer for that. I mean, it's got to be the mental part, right? Like at some point, your body's going to get through it. But whether it's on Everest, which we just call the like slow grade suffering, when you're at those high altitudes for weeks on end, and you're just going like, what am I doing here? Sitting in this tent and I just feel like crap. Or you're, halfway through the English Channel, I got stung like 100 times by jellyfish.
Oh my
you're like,
gosh.
how's this going to work out? Like I'm okay at the moment, but if I get stung by another 10 or 50 or 100, like, is that going to happen? Or on the bike ride, like, as you said, when I'm getting up in the morning, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get on this bike and I feel like absolutely trash. Okay, maybe that's partly the physical part, but it's mostly the mental part to get on the bike. And it was always on the bike ride, it was the first hour and the last hour of the bike were always the hardest. The in between parts were usually mostly okay.
Yeah.
But it was the first and the last hour that were hard because like the saddle sores and just getting going and then being like, oh my gosh, this is taking forever to get that last hour done. So
Right.
just sticking with it, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, so for somebody who's, in the middle of a hard season right now, chosen or not, or maybe they're planning their hard thing that they're about to try to endure, prove something to themselves or to a community or whatever their motivation is. Like, what advice would you give somebody in a hard season?
If you're not there now, as you said, I'd say set the big goal. I mean, honestly, the worst thing that can happen is you don't accomplish one. I always hoped that I would accomplish the three events, but I always figured like if I could get two out of those, that would be awesome. Or even one would be like an accomplishment. So
Right.
it was kind of like icing on the cake to get all three really. And so set that big goal and give yourself the chance to succeed big. And if you're in
Mm.
that hard season, you just got to think about like, it might be hard, but you just have to keep going. You're going to get there. And
Yeah.
whatever that is, whether it's an athletic goal or your relationship or your job or something like that, there's always more in the tank. There's so much more in the tank than you ever would imagine. And I think that's ultimately what the Ultimate World Tri taught me is there's more in the tank than you would ever know.
Mm.
So yeah, just keep going.
Yeah. So keep going. There's more in the tank, whether you're choosing it or it's happening to you. And I think for the person who goes, okay, that's great. I want to believe that's true. I got more in the tank. Do you have any tricks to like in the moments where it's hard to believe that you can keep going, spur yourself on? Any like insider tips?
I mean, I guess I would equate it to like climbing Everest, and it's always one step at a time. That's what it is. You can't think about when you get to the base of Everest and you're looking up at it, and you can't think about the summit. You have to think about getting to Camp One, or even we climbed from the north side, so you're getting to interim camp, and that's 2,000 feet above. You're at 17,000 feet. You're going to 19,000 feet. You got to worry about that. And then you got to worry about getting to, Camp One. And then every step of the way, you got to break it down into smaller segments and make it kind of feasible in your own mind. Because if you look at the whole goal, it can easily overwhelm you. And
Mm-hmm.
so, same thing for the bike ride. When I was like day 5 and I hadn't crossed into Montana yet, and I'm thinking like, this is never going to happen. Like I can't get across the country. Instead it was like, I got to get across to the next, the next city that night. I got to finish this day. And if I have to quit after another day, that's fine. But I will tell you the one thing about the bike ride, especially, is that it was like a roller coaster. I swear, either every good day I had, the next day was really tough. And then every tough day I had, the next day was good. So you get
Mm.
through that day, and then next day after that was always going to be tough. And I just got to get through this day. And you get through that
Yeah.
day and you're going to get to the next one. And then I'd have this like glorious day with an amazing sunset, or I'd just feel better on the bike, or maybe the scenery would be better, whatever. It could be a
Yeah.
million things that make it worth it.
Yeah.
But you just got to take it one step at a time.
Mm. Yeah. Break it up into bite-sized, manageable pieces, and then do those little pieces one step at a time, and
Yep.
then incremental.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
No, that's
exactly
good
right.
advice.
Yep.
So I like to finish conversations with the same question, because I think, like we all have hard seasons, but hard stuff generally is a part of life, like your whole life. And it's all relative, right, to the season that you find yourself in. So what is a hard thing that you're in the middle of right now?
Going back to I think one of your first questions about the balance, right? And trying to figure out the balance of the work and the play and the athletics and what I'm doing in my life. I think that's always um, a tough thing to figure out the right balance for. Um, After the World Tri, of course, we had COVID. That was super tough on everybody. I
Yeah.
can't imagine being a parent or something else. Like, that was tough on everybody and whatnot. So now it's kind of like getting back into like the rhythm of life at this point and trying to figure out, okay, well, like, how much do I want to travel? Do I want to try something again, like the Ultimate World Tri, or is there different kind of hard season or something like that around the
Yeah.
corner? So it's, I think right now it's more, for me, it's more setting goals. This last year has been great. I've gotten to travel a lot and do some cool things, but we also, I kind of alluded to this, but I think we bit off a little more than we could chew. And we had a couple of, I'm not going to call them failures, but we didn't succeed at a couple of our adventures. We went to climb G2 in Pakistan, which is the 13th highest mountain in the world, and just got sick as dogs and weren't able to accomplish that. And, there's some other ones that didn't quite work out. So it's about finding that balance of having the goals, being able to accomplish them. All of them is never an option. Hopefully you're reaching high enough that some of them won't work out. But also like enjoying it while you're doing it, because you're just trying to find that balance with it all. And then of course, being able to like afford it all, pay for it all, and, work
Sell
enough
more
to
houses.
do all that, right? All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I hate to say it. Well, I don't hate to say it, like life is pretty good at the moment, but I'd say that you're always working on these things and trying to find that right balance and figure out what's next in our lives. I mean, maybe I should have answered the question with one of the hardest things we're dealing with is to try to figure out, as a couple who travels a lot and does all these athletic accomplishments, do we want to have kids? That's been a huge struggle in our lives. And so we actually just froze embryos and eggs to give ourselves some options. So maybe we'll call it insurance, even though it's never 100%. And so, I'm 41 years old, and we probably want to have kids, but we enjoy doing these things, and we've worked our whole lives to get to this point where we can kind of, fly around the world or even in our backyard and try hard things. I know having kids will be amazing experience, but do we want to do that now, or do we want to do it later, or not at all? That's probably the hardest thing we're struggling with at the moment.
Yeah, those are big questions.
Yeah.
And not like just for a 1-year season, like having kids is like the rest of your life change, Yep. So
in a good and bad way, right? Like,
totally.
I can't imagine not having them, but also it's going to change everything. Like, I know that. And so trying to figure out that question is probably the toughest thing we're trying to figure out at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, that's it's awesome that you're like thoughtful about, that opportunity in season. Cause some people do it very thoughtlessly and then, find themselves bitter or not wanting to be in that season. But, if you come to it thoughtfully, like you're going to want to be there, similar to what you did, with Caroline. So it's a good place to be, to take it slow and do it right. So cool, man. Well, Rob, I could talk to you a long time, and wish we had more time, but I'm going to wrap it up. And I think for people who are, maybe this first time they've heard your story or heard of you and want to ask you some questions, maybe they're thinking about doing something challenging and just want practical tips, or maybe they just want to follow all the adventures and the things you're up to. What's the best way for them to keep up or keep in touch or get in touch?
Probably the easiest way would be Instagram, rob.lee, and my last name is spelled Lea. So rob.lea on Instagram, probably the easiest way to find me. And it's been a pleasure talking with you. And as you said, I feel like we could talk for a while, but this has been fun. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening to the Do Hard Things podcast by Elite SRS. We hope you are encouraged today and have a newfound hope to persevere. Be sure to subscribe for more great episodes and conversations. And if you ever want to watch an episode, check out our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/EliteSRS. Have a blessed day.